We will now move into the second session. After addressing governance in the first session, we will now move into this session, which is focused on collaborative policy and practice. And so the idea is to focus on developing programs and policies that address the silos of respective ministries and organisations. Our first speaker in this session is Professor Darryl Choy. He is Program Co-Leader in the Water Sensitive Urbanism program of the Cooperative Research Centre for Water Sensitive Cities. He is also a professor in Environmental and Landscape Planning in the School of Environment at Griffith University. He has worked as a practicing planner as well as an academic. And with that, Darryl, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Good morning, folks, and I thank the OBA for the invitation to participate in this series around the east coast of Australia, which is fascinating, and particularly meeting up with folks that are in sectors that I very rarely have had anything to do with. Like, I think I was the only person that didn't put my hand up to be in the water sector, energy sector or the food sector. So I just want to talk about the notion about joined up planning or the alignment of plans. I'm going to use South East Queensland as a case study where I've actually been seconded from universities into real practice with the state government of the previous generation, where we've attempted to start to align the multitude of plans that are out there. So there's the institutional landscape of South East Queensland, various local government boundaries and so on, but in that one geographic area of South East Queensland, which is Noosa to the north, Coolangatta, Gold Coast to the south, and west of Toowoomba, there's about 3 Commonwealth Government agencies operating in that space. There's over 13 state agencies. There's 1 regional planning agency. There's 10 local governments. Now, when we started this research work and practice work, there were 18 councils. So Queensland's bitten the bullet and gone through council amalgamations, and New South Wales has yet to experience that. There's 2 regional organisations of councils there. There's 5 collective catchments, 1 natural resource management body now, there used to be 2, and there's a multitude of community groups. So they're all operating in that same institutional space, that same administrative area, beavering away, doing what they do best, and it's their own individual plans, own individual strategies, call it what you will. So in the early regional planning process of South East Queensland, we were confronted with various plans from main roads, from the farming sector, from the natural resource management sector, the economic sector and so on, but no one really had a clue as to how one would start to link them up and try to get some composite view about planning in that one region. The sort of planning hierarchy that affects South East Queensland, and it affects, read any region in Australia for this matter. So you've got the national interest being looked after by the feds, state interests through, in Queensland, 1 single state planning policy, and a state plan now, whereas in most other states you have a number of state planning policies, but Queensland, the current government saw fit to roll them into 1. You've got regional interests being rolled out, but of course at that level there's no level of government, there's no, in most cases, except if you look at the Hunter Valley, there's no funding source, no regional levies, for example, no rate base. So that's an interesting level of planning we're doing without the necessary support base. And then at the lower level, you've got the local government level in the yellow there. The constitutional responsibilities for statutory land use planning in Australia rest with state governments. They didn't surrender that to the federal government in 1901. So the federal government is essentially dealt out of this planning process, with the exception of where they've entered into international agreements or there's been a High Court determination in their favour. And the classic case where the feds do get involved is through the EPBC Act. And that's because they've signed that on behalf of all the states of Australia. The The only problem with the EPBC Act is that the previous government didn't adopt the Hawke review recommendations, which was to start to look at managing environmental protection through a spatial framework. So at the moment, the EPBC Act only allows the federal government to come in when there's an endangered species, you know, a parrot about to be destroyed through development, or a grass species or something, which is not the best way to go about environmental protection on a spatial area. So the planning, that's the areas that are got statutory elements across that landscape, that institutional landscape. And the planning we're doing these days is really at this regional scale, and it includes state interest, regional interest, and local government interest, as shown by that transparent overlay there. So let me now just look at some of the theory that we've started to develop on this alignment models. We talk about, there's a dictionary definition of to align. I'm not going to bore you with all these definitions, I'll just throw them up there. What I want you to note is there's a common word or common intention being portrayed throughout all these definitions, and that is this need to join. So we talk about horizontal alignment at the same scale. So I'm going to use the case in South East Queensland of the Regional Natural Resource Management Plan. It's a non-statutory plan. It's done by an NRM body, not like New South Wales and Victoria, where there's a statutory body. In the case of New South Wales, it's called a Local Land Service, LLS, previously a CMA, and in Victoria they're CMAs, but they're part of government. So they've got sort of partial statutory cover. But in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, and elsewhere, they're totally non-statutory plans done outside government. So the idea here is, how do you align a regional NRM plan with the primary plan for that region, which in the Queensland case is the regional plan? So under the current legislation, which is about to change, either was changed yesterday or today or maybe tomorrow, I can't quite figure this out, the website doesn't tell me, but the current government in Queensland is about to change it so that it downplays the primary role or the statutory elements to this regional plan. But at the moment, it's the primary plan. We also talk about vertical alignment when we try to link the regional NRM plan with the local government plan. So in the past, most local government plans never acknowledged natural resource management issues. They just dealt with land development processes and the like. So the benefits for aligning plans, well, obviously it gives greater certainty to achieving desired outcomes that we're all aspiring to do for various planning platforms. It minimises or possibly could eliminate conflicting policies, overlaps and duplications. It provides a united front. It improves the chances of successful implementation. Now, this is what the real purpose of all this exercise is all about. We do plan making fairly well. We know how to do that. But we know bugger all about how to implement plans. In fact, I would argue we don't do it at all. Most politicians are happy to get up there and present in front of yes, thank you. I just remembered I'm being recorded. So I won't mention any names. All right, okay. So politicians are very happy to, get up there and be part of the presentation of a new plan in front of the TV cameras and what have you. But they put very little effort into ensuring there's finances available to monitor that plan to work out whether that plan's objectives have been achieved or not, let alone any process of adaptive management. So really what we're on about here is, how do we achieve successful implementation through this more collaborative approach? Another benefit is that it forges alliances or partnerships for collaborative implementation, which would not otherwise have been there, and I'll demonstrate that later on. It obviously maximises the leverage of the various plans. It gains economies of scale. It broadens the support base for the intent of the plans. And of course, it strengthens the intent of the subordinate plan. In the case I'm using the regional NRM plan. It influences the primary decision-making processes. And lastly, it gains the advantage of the primary plan. In other words, it gains statutory cover, which otherwise it would never not have had. So what are the different forms of alignment that I'm talking about? Well, there's three basic categories. There's this intention to connect the plans, and that could be either a full connection or a partial connection. We might want to try to embed the plans as opposed to connecting them, partly or fully. And thirdly, we want to integrate the plans as another third option of plan alignment. And the dictionary definitions, I won't bore you, but I'll just throw them up there. But again, you'll see that in all the definitions, there's this consistent intention to join plans up. So how does that play it out into the different joined up models? Well, the connect option, if we want to connect the plans, I would call that holding hands. That's all the plans do, they just hold hands. The second category, when you embed plans, you piggyback the subordinate plan off the primary plan. So that's a piggyback model. If you want to integrate under that definition, you can assume. So the whole plan, the whole subordinate plan is consumed by the primary plan. Now, there's about 8 or 10 different versions of the holding hands, piggyback or consume models, which I don't have time to go through. I'll just go through 3 to illustrate the case of the NRM plan in South East Queensland and how it's been aligned horizontally and vertically. So the first one, holding hands model, this is merely where you acknowledge or cross-reference some content in the regional NRM plan with the primary regional statutory plan. So the outcomes there, whole or parts of both documents are joined. You achieve alignment by cross-referencing between the documents, but, and the important but here, is that both plans still remain a standalone document. It's not consumed. All right, so, and that's very important as you'll see when I get to talking about investments associated with this planning process, that they maintain their separate standalone status. The other possible, this is a consumed approach, partly broken up and partly joined in, is you actually physically take parts out of that regional plan and plonk them in the regional plan. And that then, obviously, under the consume model, downplays the standalone status of the regional NRM plan. Vertical alignment, and this is where it takes a fair bit of negotiation to get local councils to pick up and put into their statutory town planning schemes in New South Wales, what's called the local environmental plans, elements of the regional NRM plans, the LLS plans. But again, that can be done, and again, both documents remain standalone, so it's merely a holding hands exercise. Now, the other challenge here is that all these planning processes have some form of financial commitment associated with them to achieve the goals, to achieve the aims of the plan. In the case of the regional NRM plan, they have regional investment strategies. So they draw money from various sources, various levels of government and the private sector to provide money to invest in the priority targets in the regional NRM plan to rehabilitate the landscape. That's what it's all about. How do you rehabilitate the degraded landscape according to priorities in that regional NRM plan? So they're out there allocating funds to private sector, local governments, or whoever, to do that work. But there's also this other statutory plan of state and regional governments. In the case of Queensland, there's an implementation plan that goes with it, an infrastructure plan. And the simple guideline here is that in Queensland you can't have a policy or a program in the regional plan unless it's funded in the budget. So they started off by having regional infrastructure plans, and they've now incorporated those into one state region by region plan. But nevertheless, the same rule applies. You can't have a policy or a program in the regional plan unless it's been funded. So we've got 2 parallel lines of funding, 2 parallel lines of infrastructure investment, if you will, going on. So it only makes sense that you start to align them to achieve all those benefits of the alignment process that I mentioned previously. Okay, so in South East Queensland, in the last iteration of the regional plan, 2009, the regional NRM plan on the left has been aligned with the primary regional plan on the right. And it's also been embedded into some, not all, local government plans where local governments have been receptive to that approach to date. Now, the way in which it works in Queensland, as I said, that regional plan is the primary plan. It overarches all other forms of planning. It even overarches state planning policy at the moment. So it provides guidance and direction to all state agencies. So the Department of Main Roads, for example, no longer can make its own decisions on prioritising its own budget. its budget must now align to the priorities in the regional plan. So in fact, what was driving development in the past, urban development in the past in Queensland, was where the infrastructure was. So if the roads were going to some point, if the water was going to some point, well, urban developers followed the infrastructure trail. So now we've got it the other way around, which is obviously the urban development is going to where it is best fitted, environmentally and socially and culturally and everything else, and infrastructure follows. So it's no longer infrastructure-led development in Queensland. The regional plan also gives guidance and direction to local government, as one might expect, and also to the private sector through the need for them to do composite structure planning for greenfield developments. So the alignment of the regional NRM plan to the regional statutory plan works like this. In both elements there are in both plans there's various elements. Obviously starts with visions. So it only makes sense that you try to align the visions. But then in the NRM plan, there's a whole range of targets that are being funded. Aspirational targets, but more importantly, resource condition targets and management targets. So by 2020, this money will be allocated to improve this resource condition by such and such. Right? And money was allocated accordingly. And of course, in the statutory regional plan, there's similar targets, or if you like, they're called principles, policies and programs. Excuse me. Again, with money being allocated, and there was an NRM section in there as well. There's a biodiversity section in there as well. There's a regional landscape section in there as well. So the idea was to look at where these targets and intentions in the regional plans could be aligned. The DRO, which is the second dot point, if you like, in the regional plan, stands for desirable regional outcome. Queensland has moved towards a performance-based planning system. Unlike most other states which are still dealing with a legacy British town planning system, which has permitted uses and non-permitted uses and consent uses. If you as a developer can demonstrate you can achieve at a DRO, then essentially there's no reason to be rejected. The question is, are the desirable regional outcomes informed by science? I'll leave that hang there. Okay, so that's the way in which the planning was aligned in 2009. But, as I said, there's also all this regional investment in infrastructure planning. So again, it was a matter of recognising in the infrastructure plan of the state government, it's not only physical infrastructure, not only social infrastructure, but there's also green infrastructure or environmental infrastructure, call it what you will, which is not roads, and bridges or hospitals or schools. So that is more in alignment with the regional investment strategy. Okay, I've just been given the 3 minute. Is 3 minutes, or is it, you just couldn't put the fourth up? So I'm going to have to quickly go through this now. I'm sorry. So what we've done is we've come up with these roadmaps. So here's one at the regional scale, which shows you the route that one takes to get the embedment of the alignment. But what's important here is those asterisks I've just put up there on the screen. That identifies where the rubber hits the road, where the players in this process, politicians and planners and the like, have to go into heavy negotiation. Negotiation is a big part of planning, particularly implementation. It's never done before. We just did plans. We thought, that's beaut, put them in front of a television camera and launch them with bands playing. We've also done that for the vertical with local government planning and come up with a roadmap for that. And again, we can identify where negotiations have to occur in that landscape, that institutional landscape, in order to achieve this alignment. The important thing about what I've got here is most states have a requirement for local governments to do an annual mandatory corporate plan. Now, unless there's a policy in that plan to undertake certain intentions, activities, councils can't put it in their financial plan. It can't be funded. So if you want something funded in a local government land, it's got to be in the operational plan, it's got to be in the financial plan, and it's got to be covered by the annual corporate plan. Otherwise, forget it. So you can see the reason to start to link from the regional scale downwards here. Okay, so the way ahead. Quickly jumping to what we're doing in the Cooperative Research Centre for Water Sensitive Cities, which Marguerite briefly introduced in her presentation. That's the research question that we're trying to address. Again, it's about integrated approach, whole of catchment planning and management. We want to link cities ecologically and hydrologically with their region. So this is not just about an urban metabolism model for a city. This is looking at across the city region, whole of catchment approach. So that means we're looking at urban, peri-urban and rural landscapes. If you look at the landscape values across that landscape that goes beyond the city, there's a raft of values there that planning has to deconflict. All those values are in conflict in any spatial area. So planning's about deconflicting those values, understanding those values. Those values come from the community. They need to be informed by good science. There's also this demand on the regional landscape from a water perspective, urban demands, rural demands, peri-urban demands, environmental demands, and more recently we recognise there's a cultural demand on water. So again, planning has to deal with not only just the water allocation issue, which is normally done in a separate planning process, but it's got to be linked in here now with land use, because land use is the user of this water, and that's been the disconnect previously. So the question is, for us, water, is it a linking element in the landscape for joined up planning? That's what we're trying to do. Also, look at the different roles of water. If water performs all those different functions, it's only logical we ask the question, can planning join the managerial connections between these roles of water? We're also going to be looking at this through three different lenses. Flooding is one. So the question is, how is the community's response and recovery to floods being addressed through the planning process? The second lens is the regional open space system, which water provides a major component. So the question is the functional regional open space system or green space system being delivered through the planning process? Yes or no? The third lens, water as an ecosystem service. It provides, it's a provisioning service, it's a regulating service, it's a cultural service. So are those valuable ecosystem services being provided or protected through the planning process? So how do we link that up? Our conceptual model at the moment looking at a water balance model, surface and groundwater, inputs, outputs, in terms of quality and quantity. And then where Steve Kenway and Marguerite's work comes in is to look at metabolism model across that city region, peri-urban and rural landscapes as well as urban, and hopefully, if the data's there, to link water and energy through that process. Look at it through the lenses of flooding, ecosystem services and open space. Put that in the present context, because planning at the moment is dealing with the present population, and that'll give us what we're going to call an adaptive mass balance and urban regional metabolism model. But we need, as planning, to be proactive. So what's the population projection for that same region in the future, some N years in the future, probably 20 or so years, and then start to link it up. So there's an example of all the desperate individual bits of planning that you might find in one region. We'll map out the roadmap, as I showed you before, and we're in the process of doing that now. That'll give us a planning alignment process, that roadmap. We'll use this adaptive mass balance urban regional metabolism model as the framework to start to link all those different individual bits of planning in any one region, looking at South East Queensland, Melbourne, Greater Melbourne and Greater Perth regions at the moment, through that process to give us this joined up plan. So at the end of all that, we're hoping that everyone's going to be rowing in the same direction, and that we'll have a better understanding about water in that total landscape. So thanks very much, and I guess there'll be questions later. Thank you.